Hello, hi, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to this concluding and final lecture on ENM 6212 British Poetry Second. This class is for the students who are currently in their Masters of English, and this is going to be our final and concluding class on British Poetry 2, where we'll be concluding block number 3, units 13 to 15, and block number 4, unit 16 to 20. Myself, Shalini Chaudhary, I am a guest faculty of English at Mata Tripura Sindri Open University, and I am the facilitator for this particular course of MA English, which is on British poetry. So let us start our discussion over these particular units. As today we are going to discuss a number of units, so the class will take quite longer. So it might be around a 2 hour class. So you can consider it like a merge of two classes because we have to conclude the syllabus in this particular lecture because the next semester is starting soon, right? So that is why this is the concluding class, and I'll try to make you explain in the best possible manner, and that is why we'll be extending the time duration for this particular class. So let us start with the discussion, and let us first talk about and let us first discuss the objectives that I have planned in relation to these particular units which are there in your syllabus. Right, so I hope all of you are right now aware with the course structure and the division of credits. There are in total 5 courses that are being offered to you under the Masters of English program, and I'm teaching 2 of them, that is Shakespeare ENM 6212 and British Poetry, which is this particular class is based on, that is ENM 6214. Both of these courses are also for 4 credits. Now let us move into the objectives for today's lecture. So we'll understand features of dramatic monologue because earlier in the last lecture we have started with the Last Touches by Robert Browning. So I have told you that Robert Browning, the Victorian poet, is very much famous for his writing of dramatic monologue. So he had developed a unique technique which is known as dramatic monologue, where he was combining dramatic and serious subject matter in the form of a monologue where there is only a single speaker. And because of that monologue, we get to understand the psychological characteristic of the character. So we get deep into the internal mind of the character through these dramatic monologues, with which Robert Browning is famous for. There is another dramatic monologue that we are discussing by Robert Browning, which is titled as Fra Lippo Lippi. And then we'll also be discussing Ulysses, which is another dramatic monologue by a different prominent writer of Victorian era, that is uh, Lord Alfred Tennyson. Right? So Tennyson's Ulysses, we'll be discussing that also, and it is also written in the form of a dramatic monologue. So you have to remember that a dramatic monologue is combining dramatic subjects with monologue technique where there is only a single speaker who's speaking his heart out, and because of that speech you get to know the inner psychological condition of the characters, and sometimes the internal traits are also getting depicted via the monologue. Like for example, earlier we have discussed about the Last Duchess, so we get to know about the traits that the Duke of Ferrara were having, that he was very much dominant, he was a lover of power, he likes to control people, he likes giving command, he wants that there should be special attention for him, right? So he was very patriarchal in nature, he was a supporter of power dominance, he wanted to dominate people. So this was the kind of characteristic that we get to know. And then he made a very important statement that I gave command and all the smiles stopped at once. I gave the command and all the smiles stopped at once. So by this statement, what we get to understand that he has given the command for the execution of the Duchess, and that is why she is no longer alive, and that is why there is only the portrait where he's showing the portrait to one of the envoy, and he's saying that she's looking as if she's alive, which means that she is no longer alive, and the execution or the killing has been implemented by the orders of the Duke of Ferrara. So these were the things that we get to understand by the monologue. So we get to understand the inner psychological thinking process and the kind of perspective that the person is having with the help of the dramatic monologue. So this is the main characteristic that you have to remember in relation to the literary form of dramatic monologue used by both Robert Browning and Tennyson, one of the greatest writers of the Victorian era. So when we're talking about the Victorian era, at the time when Queen Victoria was ruling England, it was a period of industrialization, it was a period of expansion, it was a period of a conflict between faith and industrialization, right? What you should choose. It was a period when Darwin has given his theory of the origin of species, survival of the fittest. So there was skepticism that whether we need to trust God if it is all science, if it is all survival of the uh, finest person, then what is the role of God behind all these things? So there was a lot of skepticism that was developing during that period of time. So during that period, there were three prominent poets. One is Robert Browning, we have discussed. Another is Tennyson, that we'll be discussing. And the another one who was depicting about the loss of faith in the Victorian era was Matthew Arnold. So he has written some of the greatest poems, such as Scholar Gypsy, right? And he has also written Dover Beach. So here in Dover Beach, here signifies about the sea of faith. So sea of faith means the basically the belief that we were having in God and spiritualism, it is getting declined. So he was talking about that in the works. So these are the three prominent writers from the Victorian era, the poets particularly, right? I'm talking about the poets. Right, so we'll be analyzing major themes such as duty versus desire, art versus reality, escapism versus action, and body versus the soul. We'll be interpreting key symbols in the Lady of Shalott and Lotus Eater. Lady of Shalott by Tennyson, Lotus Eater again by Tennyson. Examine representation of heroism, obedience and sacrifice in the Charge of the Light Brigade. Charge of the Light Brigade is another poem based on the idea of patriotism. It is based on the Crimean War and how the British soldiers fight against the Russian forces. Right, this is the poem is all about. Then identify use of poetic techniques such as imagery, rhythm, repetition, irony, and musicality. Understand the influence of Renaissance and Victorian context in shaping themes and ideas. So, what was the role of Victorian context and the Renaissance era in shaping the themes and ideas of the times? Evaluate character perspective and moral ambiguities across the poem. We'll also be evaluating the perspective that the characters are having and the moral ambiguities, the moral complexities that we get to see in these poems. Now, we'll develop critical interpretation and analytical skills for literary text. This will also help you in developing interpretation skills when you are reading poems and also the analytical skills of literary text. So let us delve into the first unit, which is about Fra Lippo Lippi, a dramatic monologue by Robert Browning. So Fra Lippo Lippi by Robert Browning, it is a dramatic monologue in which the Renaissance painter monk. So he is a Renaissance painter as well as a monk. What is his name? Fra Lippo Lippi. He is a monk and he is also a painter belonging to the Renaissance era. Speaks directly to a group of watchmen who have caught him wandering the street at nights. And what is happening? That monk painter, he is directly speaking to a group of watchmen who has caught him wandering on the streets late at night. So he is the speaker, he is the sole speaker, he is the person who will be giving a single speech. And by that speech, we will get to understand his psychological and internal conditions. So the poem opens with Fra Lippo Lippi being stopped by the city guards late at the night. So what is happening? But the guards are not speaking because in dramatic monologue, there is only one person that is speaking. So we get to know that he's getting stopped by Fra Lippo Lippi himself, right? So the guard is not telling us that he is stopping. Fra Lippo Lippi is telling us, the monk, the painter monk is telling us that while he was wandering on the streets at night, he was stopped by a group of watchmen. Instead of showing fear, he begins speaking boldly and humorously, trying to explain his identity. So instead of showing fear, He started speaking very boldly and confidently, often using humor, trying to explain his identity. And he was trying to explain his identity. He reveals that he is monk and a well-known painter under the patronage of the powerful Medici family. Then he explained his identity, that he is a monk and he is also a very well known painter working under the patronage, right? So during the Renaissance period, there was patronage given from the noble people, so that the artist and the dramatist, they can write and paint their work. Basically, it is a sort of financial assistance. So he is working under the patronage of powerful Medici family. You have to remember the name of the family who has provided patronage. It is the powerful Medici family. He casually admits that he was out seeking pleasure, hinting at his indulgent and worldly nature. So he is saying that I am here just to seek some pleasure from the surroundings, which is hinting that he's indulgent and having a worldly nature. As he continues, Lipo recounts his childhood. He describes how he was orphaned at a young age and forced to live on the streets. So while he was talking about his identity, he recounts his childhood experiences. He describes that how he was orphaned at a young age and then he was forced to live on the streets, and that is why we can see the fascination with the streets, begging for food. Eventually, he was taken into a monastery, not out of spiritual calling, but as a means of survival. So he became a monk not because of his spiritual calling, because it was his only means of surviving. Because that monastery provided him a place to live and have proper means of survival. So this background is crucial because it shapes his outlook on life. He values the physical material world because he has experienced deprivation. Now we get to see that he is materialistic. He's valuing the material things. He's valuing food. He values materialistic pleasure because he has gone through a life of deprivation where the basic necessities were not even available, right? So before judging people, you need to understand their background, that if they are making a certain choice, what is the reason behind that choice? There has to be certain things because of which they are making a different choice, right? So instead of directly condemning someone, you need to understand the backstory. You need to understand the reason for which they have chosen a certain path, right? So this is what we get to understand, that he has a very deprived childhood. Then Lippo then begins to explain his approach to art. He insists that painting should represent real life. Then he moves on to explaining that he wasn't a monk because like because he wasn't a monk because of Array. Okay, ha. So he was telling that he became a monk not because of the spiritual calling. So it was not something which was naturally coming to him. It was just a means of survival. But when he's talking about painting, he's giving us a different idea, that what is his view about painting. So he explains his approach to art. He insists that painting should represent real life. So his idea of art is that painting should represent the real life condition, including the human body, their emotions, their everyday experiences. He criticized those who believe that art should only focus on spiritual or religious ideas. Now, what is he saying? That art should represent every form of life, every aspect of human life, the real life, such as the human body, the emotions they are going through, their everyday experiences. It should not be just restricted to the spiritual as well as religious ideals, right? It should not only focus on spiritual or religious ideals. Instead, it should be rooted into realism, real life presentation of human beings. So, arguing instead that God is present in the physical world and therefore realism is not sinful but meaningful. So, he's actually propagating the idea of realism, that realism is not sinful, it is not a sin, it is meaningful because God is also present in the physical world. So, it is important to talk about the physical world. Then, let us talk about the analysis of part one. It is a dramatic monologue The poem is a classic dramatic monologue where Lippo personalities unfolds through the speech that he is giving. His tone is conversational and lively, humorous as well as ironic, slightly defensive but confident. So, through his voice, Browning creates a vivid, complex character, which is earthly, which is rebellious, and who is also very intellectually sharp. Now, conflict of body versus soul is very prominent in the entire dramatic monologue because a central theme introduced in part one is the conflict between. So, in this part one, we get to see that he's criticizing the idea where art has been only associated with spiritual and religious matters, right? So, he's criticizing that idea that art should only focus on the religious or basically the spiritual representation. He says that art should be rooted into realism. It should represent the real aspect of human life, such as their body, their day-to-day experiences. And he's also giving a reason that God also exists in the physical world, right? So that is why it is important for us to represent the physical world. Why we are not representing the physical world? If God lives in the physical world, so representing the physical world is actually a good thing rather than being considering it as the being considering it as a sin, right? So it is a good thing. That is what he's trying to portray. That is his view of art. So a central theme introduced in part one is the conflict between spiritual ideals, that is the church authority, physical reality, human body and experiences. Lippo challenges the church's insistence on suppressing bodily representation. He argues that the body is not sinful. It is a part of God's creation. So what is he arguing? That body is not sinful. If you're talking about realism, if you're talking about human body, this is not a sin. It is a part of God's creation. So this reflects Renaissance humanism, which emphasized the dignity and beauty of human life. So what is it reflecting? It is reflecting Renaissance humanism. What is humanism? Renaissance humanism? Renaissance humanism is a belief that humans are at the center of the universe. Right? What is this belief? Humans are at the center of the universe. So this idea where we are talking about depicting the human experiences is actually aligning with the Renaissance humanism, which puts human at the center of the universe, which emphasizes the dignity and beauty of human life. Now there's art and realism. So Lippo's artistic philosophy is clearly stated. Art should imitate life. So what is his artistic philosophy? What is he propagating? He's saying that artistic philosophy should be focused on the imitation of real life experiences. Painting should include body, flash, expression, and individuality. Spiritual truth can be found through physical representation. He's talking about that the spiritual truth, the religious truth, this could be found out with the representation of physical representation. So this is a critique of medieval religious art, which often avoided realism in favor of symbolic spirituality. So this type of idea of art is actually critiquing the medieval religious art, which often avoided realism in favor of symbolic spirituality. Then we have social critique. Through Lippo's background, Browning also critiques poverty and social neglect. So the background with which Lippo was coming from, Browning is also critiquing a society which propagates poverty and social neglect. There is hypocrisy of religious institutions. Lippo becomes a product of his environment. So he has become a product of the environment in which he has lived. And that is one of the reasons he's propagating a philosophy of art which talks about human experiences. So his materialism is not mere indulgence, but a response to deprivation. So the materialistic role, or basically the materialistic choice that he has made in life, is not because of his indulgence. It is not just mere indulgence. It is a result of the life of deprivation and rigid discipline that he has to face. So the conclusion of part one is the part one of the poem establishes Fra Lippo Lippi as a rebellious yet insightful figure who questions the traditional religious views of art and life. So through humor and personal narrative, Browning explores deeper issues of artistic freedom, the value of physical world, and the tension between spirituality and realism. Then we have part two. So in section second, Fra Lippo continues explaining his artistic struggle within the monastery. So he's talking about that what kind of struggle he has to face while he was in the monastery in relation to his artistic pursuits. So he's describing how the church authorities, the prior and the other monk, they were criticizing his paintings because they are too realistic. So because his theory of art is based on realism rather than spiritualism. So these people were criticizing his art and focused too much on human body. They instruct him to paint in a more spiritual and symbolic manner, and they were asking him that you should paint in a more symbolic or spiritual manner. Why you are focused so much on the bodies? So faces uplifted, bodies idealized, and less attention to the physical detail. Lippo feels frustrated because he believes that such instruction distort reality. He argues that when he paints people as they truly are with flesh, expression, and individuality, he is actually revealing God's creation and honesty. So basically, he's giving a reply that when he's depicting a human being in their ideal form, in their real, not in the ideal form, in their real natural form, he's actually praising God's creation because humans are God's one of the best creation. So he mocks the clergy for wanting art that ignores real human experiences and instead promotes artificial spirituality. At the same time, he admits that he must obey them because they are his patrons and hold authority over him. So at the same time, he's saying that he has to agree to whatever they are saying, he has to obey because they are the patron, they are providing him with financial assistance and they have the authority over him. Then analysis is conflict between artist and authority. This section deepens the tension between individual creativity, which is depicted by Lippo in terms of his realistic artistic theory, institutional control, which is rooted in spiritualism. That is artificial spiritualism. Lippo represents the independent artist, while the church symbolizes restriction and censorship. This reflects a broader Renaissance conflict between emerging humanism and traditional religious orthodoxy. So then philosophy of art, realism versus idealism. Lippo strongly argues that art should reflect truth and reality and not the artificial ideals. The human body is divine because it is a creation by God and it is not sinful. It is actually an appreciation of a creation of God. Spiritual meaning can emerge through accurate representation of life as well. His views are aligning with Renaissance realism and humanism. Irony and humor. Lippo uses humor and irony to criticize the artificial spiritualism of the church. He imitates the monks' instructions in a mocking tone. His lively speech exposes the rigidity and hypocrisy of religious authority. This makes the critique subtle yet very powerful. Compromise and survival. So, despite his rebellion, Lippo admits that he must compromise, he must obey whatever the church is saying because they have authority over him. He depends on patrons, Medici, and the church. His artistic freedom is limited by economic and social realities. So, this shows the practical constraints on artistic expression. This shows the idea of patronage that was prevalent during the Renaissance period, or even in the Victorian period, where the noblemen or the church, they are giving a patronage. They are basically giving you financial assistance to write or paint. So when you are getting financial assistance from a authority, you are working under them and you cannot disobey them. You have to obey their orders because you are working for them. So that is what he's talking about, that the artists were having certain financial and social restraints. And that is why they were not able to portray their expression the way they wanted to. Right. So part 3. In the final section, Lippo's tone becomes more reflective. It becomes more introspective. He acknowledged that while spiritual art has its place, it should not deny the reality of human life. He imagines a balance where body and soul are represented. So in the final part, he's trying to have a balanced representation of both body and soul. As the conversation with the watchman comes to an end, Lippo highlights the mood again. Sorry, Lippo lightens. So he's humorously lightening the mood again, offering them money and joking his way out of the trouble. He prepares to return to his duties, aware that he will continue working within the system, even if he disagrees with it. So he's again going back to his reality where he is restrained by the system in which he's working in. And no matter how much he disagree with the system, he still has to continue working along with the disagreement. Then resolution, balance between body and soul representation. Lippo ultimately suggests a middle path. Art should include both physical realism as well as the spiritual meaning. The body and soul are not opposites, but they are actually complementary. If you are representing body, the soul will also be a part of it. If you are providing a proper representation of the physical aspect, you will also be able to understand the spiritual meanings. The body and soul are not opposite, complementary. This reflects a mature understanding rather than outright rebellion. Because when you are working under a system, you cannot rebel against it because you need money for the art, for the preparation of that art as well. So humanism and Renaissance spirit. The poem ends with a strong affirmation of the value of human experience, the dignity of the body, importance of observing real life experiences. These ideas are central to Renaissance humanism, which celebrated human potential in the material world. Right. So, what is a Renaissance humanism? A kind of a movement that put human being at the center of the universe, which celebrated being human, which celebrated human potential and the material world. Okay. Then character, is there something? Right. Then character complexity. Lipo is not just a rebel. He is practical. He is witty. He is self-aware. He understands the limit of his situations. He negotiates between his desire and the duty. This makes him a realistic and multi-dimensional character. This makes him a open-ended conclusion is also there in the dramatic monologue. The poem does not offer a final solution because he is still working, even if he's having disagreement with the system. The conflict between art and authority remains. Lippo continues within the system. The ambiguity reflects the ongoing struggle of artists in a society. So, in the later parts of the poem, Browning deepens the central debate about art, religion, and reality. So, through Fra Lippo's voice, he critiques rigid moral authority. He is critiquing the rigid moral authority while celebrating artistic freedom and human experiences. The poem ultimately suggests that true art must reconcile the physical and the spiritual rather than rejecting either of them. Okay, so there is, I guess, a replication of slides. This is about this. Okay, let me, delete one of it. So we have discussed the conclusion. Now let us move on to Alfred Lord Tennyson, another very prominent Victorian poet who is also associated with the literary form of dramatic monologue. So, Tennyson was born in 1905. He was also the Poet Laureate of Britain. He became the Poet Laureate in 1850, 1850. Right? So, that was the point of time when he was the Poet Laureate of Britain after William Wordsworth, because Wordsworth died in 1850. So his poetry reflects the spirit of Victorian era, a time marked by rapid scientific progress, industrialization, and religious doubt and skepticism. Tennyson's work often grapples with the tension between faith and skepticism, blending emotional depth with intellectual reflection. So major works like In Memoriam. So In Memoriam is actually a elegy that he has written commemorating and mourning the death of one of his very close friend, Arthur Hallam. This particular work was also published in the year 1850. He started writing it around 1833, and it took him such a long time to complete this work. So 1850 is considered to be a very important year in the life of Tennyson because he became Poet Laureate. In Memoriam was published, and also he got married to the love of his life. So that is why 1850 is a very important year in his life. So the Lady of Shalott and Ulysses established him as a poet who combines personal grief with universal concerns. Now, major themes that we get to see in the writings of Tennyson is conflict between faith and doubt, because he was writing during the Victorian period, and Victorian period was marked by industrialization at one point of time. There was technological advancement. There was skepticism regarding faith that was going on. And why the skepticism was growing? Because Darwin has presented his theory of origin of species, where he was talking about the survival of the fittest. So that was one of the reason why the skepticism was growing among the people. They were actually questioning the faith, the belief that they were having in God. So this is one prominent theme that is getting reflected. One of Tennyson's central concern is the crisis of faith, which is caused by the scientific discoveries, right? So why is there a crisis of faith? Because of the scientific discoveries, which is putting science at the center. That everything that is happening is because of the science, like the Darwinian evolution. So in Memoriam AAHH, he explores grief and questions about immortality and divine justice. The poem reflects Victoria's struggle to reconcile religion with modern science. Death, loss, immortality, another important theme. Tennyson frequently mediates on death and hope for life after death. His elegiac tone is most evident In Memoriam, written after the death of his very close friend Arthur Hallam. So, death is not just an end but a gateway to spiritual reflection. This was the final conclusion that he was making in the poem. Initially, he was lamenting the loss, but eventually, he moved towards being more reflective about it. Then we have heroism and perseverance. Tennyson celebrates courage. Tennyson is celebrating the courage, determination, and the human will to strive. In Ulysses, the hero refuses to accept the passivity and declares that he desires to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. So basically, here the character is showing that he wants continuous experiences in life. He wants continuous adventure in life. He do not want a life which is full of stability, and he does not want a monotonous life. He wants adventures and struggles. Right? So he wants to strive, to seek, to find. He wants to find new things, and never want to yield. So this reflects the Victorian ideal of duty and action. Nature and its dual role. Nature in Tennyson is both beautiful and comforting, harsh and indifferent as well. So In Memoriam, nature is seen as red in tooth and claw, suggesting a cruel evolutionary struggle. So In Memoriam, he is reflective a harsh and evil side of nature. That nature is red in tooth and claw, which suggests that nature is cruel. Nature does not pity anyone. It is basically the most powerful force. Isolation and alienation. Many of his characters experience loneliness, separation. So, in The Lady of Shalott, the lady lives isolated in a tower. So, there is a lady living isolated in a tower because she has been cursed, which symbolizes the artistic separation from reality, which is also depicting that how artists are separated from reality. Now, if we talk about the style of writing of Tennyson, he used musicality and lyricism. Tennyson is known for his melodious verses, rhythmic verses, careful use of rhythm, meter, and the sound devices, which creates musical, almost hypnotic quality. Rich imagery and symbolism. Obviously, he was using a lot of imagery. What are imagery? When we are depicting a situation in such a manner that there is a visual picture that is created in our mind. For example, use of natural imagery like flowers, rivers, seasons. So there is a visual picture getting created. Symbolic landscape to reflect inner emotions. He make use of symbolic landscape. For example, if the storm is getting reflected, it shows the psychological condition of the turmoil of the mind. Then dramatic monologue, one of the form that he is using in Ulysses, in uh, other text as well. Lotus Eater is also a monologue. So, like Robert Browning, Tennyson also uses dramatic monologue. Example, Ulysses reveals the inner thought of the hero, focus on psychological depth of the characters. So he was also making use of the dramatic monologue literary form while he was writing poems. Use of myths and legends. This is one of the most prominent characteristic feature, that he was making use of classical myths and legends. Like when we were talking about Ulysses, he has taken that myth from Greek mythology, and also it has a reference of Homer's Odysseus. Odysseus, written by Homer. Ulysses is actually the Latin word for Odysseus. So Odysseus is the actual Greek name, and Ulysses is the Latin word for it. So he has taken reference from the Greek mythology of Odysseus. Arthurian legends, ideals of the kings, characteristics of Tennyson's poetry include Victorian sensibility, reflection of moral seriousness and social concerns, philosophical depth, engages with existential and spiritual questions, emotional intensity, especially in elegiac poetry. What are elegiac poetry? Poetry written mourning the loss of a person, balance of tradition and innovation, combines classical forms with modern concerns, refinement and precision, highly polished language and structure with the use of rhythm. So, Alfred Lord Tennyson stands as a bridge between romantic emotionalism and Victorian intellectualism. His poetry captures the anxieties, hopes, and contradiction of the Victorian age, making him not only the representative poet of the Victorian age, but also a deeply universal voice which was exploring faith, loss, and human resilience during the period of technological expansion and industrial revolution. Now let us delve into the specific poems that are prescribed in the course by Tennyson. First is Ulysses. So first thing first, Ulysses is a reference from Homer's. Homer is a very famous Greek writer who has written an epic known as Odysseus. So this particular poem is based on book number 11 of Odysseus, right? So the reference is taken from book 11. Let me write it in the chat box. Source is source book 11 of Odyssey. Book 11. There is another reference, another one is of the Inferno by Dante. So in Hell, in the Circle of Hell 8, Ulysses appears, right? Because he was having excess of pride, and that is why he was in the circle of hell in the eighth circle of hell because of his excessive pride. So canto number 26, we get to see the appearance of Ulysses in Dante's Inferno, right? So the reference is from Odyssey as well as Dante's Inferno. That is something that you have to remember, that Ulysses by Tennyson is based on Dante's Canto 6 and also has a reference of Odysseus book 11 written by Homer, the famous Greek poet. Okay, book 11, source book 11 of Odi. Source book 11 of Odysseus by Homer and Canto 26 of Dante's Inferno. So these are the two main references from which this poem has been built upon, right? First major sources is book number 11 of Odysseus by Homer. Second is Canto 26 of Dante's Inferno, where Ulysses appear in hell, circle 8. So the poem is a dramatic monologue which is spoken by Ulysses, Odysseus, right? Greek term is Odysseus, Ulysses is the Latin term. The legendary Greek hero after returning home to Ithaca. So Ulysses was the king of Ithaca and he was returning back home after fighting the Trojan War. So following his long journey described as Homer's epic, so he took around 10 years to get back to his home. So, however, instead of feeling satisfied, Ulysses is restless and discontented with his present life as a king. So, instead of having a feeling of pride and satisfaction, he is instead restless and he is discontented. He is not satisfied with his present life as a king in Ithaca. He begins by expressing his dissatisfaction with ruling a savage race. So, he is saying that I'm ruling a savage race that does not understand me. He feels that staying idle and performing routine duty is completely meaningless compared to the adventure that he had in the seas while he was fighting the wars. For him, life is valuable only when it involves experiences, exploration, and action. So he says, to seek, to strive, to find, and not to yield. So this is what he means, that he wants to experience, he wants to explore, and he never wants to yield. Ulysses reflects on his past adventure, his travels, the battles, the encounters, which have shaped his identity. He believes that knowledge and experience are limitless, and even in old age, if we have the time, we should go after pursuing knowledge. He desires to continue exploring the unknown. He then speaks of his son Telemachus. Telemachus is the son of Ulysses, whom he considers capable of ruling Ithaca. He considers that my son is completely opposite of me. He is someone who like stable life. He is someone who gets satisfied by ruling races. So I think he is the best person to rule Ithaca in my absence. So he is saying that Telemachus will be ruling the place very well. So unlike Ulysses, Telemachus is patient, he is responsible, and he is suited to governance. Ulysses acknowledges his son's virtues but clearly distinguishes his own nature as one driven by adventure. So basically, he is listing that my son is very virtuous, but the way in which he was depicting the virtues felt a little satiric because he was saying that he is completely in contrast to me, and and Ulysses considered himself to be a very adventurous and a lively person. So we can see that he is somewhere calling Telemachus as a kind of boring person who gets satisfied in these monotonous tasks. So Ulysses acknowledges his son's virtues but clearly distinguishes his own nature as one driven by adventure rather than the stability. In the final part, Ulysses is turning to his old companions, the mariners with whom he used to have experiences, and urges them to set sail once again. So he's going back to the mariners and asking them that it is our time to go back to sailing. Though they are aged, he insists that they still possess the spirit and courage to seek new worlds. He's saying, no matter if we are aged, we still have that spirit. We still have the courage to seek new worlds, to discover new world. The poem ends with the famous line, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. To experience, to explore, to action, and not to yield. Now, if we talk about the analysis, there is theme of restlessness and desire for action. The central idea of the poem is Ulysses' refusal to accept stagnation. He does not want a stagnant life. He does not want static life. He does not want a monotonous life. He wants adventures and new experiences. He rejects a passive settled life, values continuous striving for experience and exploration, represent Victorian ideas of action and perseverance. Ulysses becomes a symbol of human spirit that constantly seeks growth. He becomes symbolic of human spirit that constantly seeks growth. Conflict between duty and desire. There is a tension between duty. He is having certain duty that he has to deliver as a king of Ithaca. But on the other hand, he has desire of adventure and exploration. So Ulysses recognizes his responsibilities, but he's ultimately choosing his own desire and personal fulfillment over the social obligation. This raises question about whether his decision is heroic or is it selfish. Treatment of time and aging. The poem deals significantly with old age. Ulysses acknowledges that he is no longer younger. He refuses to see aging as a limitation. Instead, he sees it as a challenge to continue striving. This reflects a powerful idea. The spirit can remain active even when the body weakens. Character of Telemachus is in contrast to the character of Ulysses. Telemachus served as a foil to Ulysses. He represents order, patience, responsibility. He symbolizes the stable continuation of society. This contrast highlights Ulysses' exceptional and unconventional nature. Heroism reinterpreted. Unlike the traditional epic hero, Ulysses is not engaged in battle but in self reflection. Heroism becomes inner determination and intellectual quest. This reflects Victorian reinterpretation of classical heroism. So, dramatic monologue technique, the poem is structured as a dramatic monologue. It reveals Ulysses' internal thoughts, his personality through his own speech. No external narrator is there. Reader must interpret the character of Ulysses the way he is explaining. Raises ambiguity. Is he admirable or is he irresponsible? Is he selfish or is he heroic? Philosophical depth. The poem explores meaning of life, the value of experiences, the inevitability of death. Ulysses' desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star. So he is desiring to follow knowledge, to go in search of knowledge like a sinking star, suggesting an endless pursuit of truth. Critical interpretation, optimistic reading. Ulysses represents courage, ambition, and the indomitable human spirit. Critical reading, he may be seen as irresponsible because he's abandoning his kingdom and he's asking Telemachus to have proper accountability for it, abandoning his duties, the family, his wife Penelope, who has been waiting for him for around 20 years. She has now grown old, but she has been waiting for him since she was a young woman, and she even rejected marrying other person in the absence of his husband. Still, the husband chooses to leave and abandon them. So this also shows that he was kind of irresponsible. He was abandoning the duties as well as the family member who have been waiting for him for such a long period of time. This duality makes the poem complex and open to interpretation. So, Ulysses is a powerful exploration of restlessness, ambition, and the human desire for meaning. Through Ulysses' voice, Alfred Lord Tennyson presents a timeless message. Life is not about passive existence, but about continuous striving, even in the face of age and mortality. Now, let us move to another dramatic monologue by Alfred Lord Tennyson, which is titled as Lotus Eater. And this particular poem is also based on Homer's Odysseus, Book 9. Ulysses is based on Book 11. This one is on Book 9, where Ulysses and his sailors arrive on an island inhabited by the Lotus Eaters. So these inhabitants this is a time period when he was coming from the Trojan War, and they were working for like 9 days and they were still not able to find shore. On that 10th day, they arrive at a shore which was inhabited by the Lotus Eaters. The inhabitants were eating a particular type of plant known as lotus. These inhabitants consume a magical plant which is called the lotus, which induces a state of deep relaxation, forgetfulness, and detachment from the world. So, what is the name of the flower? Lotus. And what is the purpose? It induces you into a state of deep relaxation. You actually leave all the worry of the realistic world. You go into a different world of relaxation where you just want to relax, you want to be comfortable, you forget everything that was there in the real life and you detach with the realistic world. So at the beginning of the poem, the sailors land on the island and encounter its dreamy, tranquil atmosphere. So some of them eat the lotus fruit and soon they fall into a state of lethargy and indifference. So what is happening? They are arriving on the island. Some of them encounter the island as dreamy, tranquil. Then some of them start eating the fruit, and because of eating that fruit, they fall into a state of lethargy. They feel tired, they feel indifferent, they lose all the desire to continue their journey. That what is the purpose of continuing this journey if the end will be death? Instead of struggling, we should just relax here. The central part of the poem is the choric song, where the sailors collectively express their wish. So the second part of the poem is written in the form of a choric song. What is chorus? Chorus is a group of people that provide a sort of commentary. In the earlier period, in the classical times, chorus was a group of members constituting the elderly member of the society. Those were there to present a sort of moral commentary to the happenings of the play. But here, the sailors are the people who are narrating. So they are singing a choric song. The sailors collectively express their wish to abandon their voyage and remain on the island forever. Right. So while the choric song, we get to understand the sailors, the people collectively. It is not an individual idea. It is a collective idea that they are expressing. They express that we all want to abandon our voyages, our travels, and remain on the island forever. They question the purpose of human labor, the suffering, the endless striving. What is it for? Why we are struggling so much if the end is death? They argue that nature itself rests peacefully. So why should humans alone struggle continuously? They are also talking about that how nature is also sometimes going into the state of peace. The nature is also relaxing. So why should it be that only the humans are always struggling? So they reflect on the burdens of life, the pain, the responsibility, aging, and the inevitability of death, and conclude that it is better to escape into a state of rest and forgetfulness. The poem ends with their decision to give up action and remain in the dreamlike existence. So the poem is ending with finally their decision of giving up the action, the voyages, the experience, the exploration, and remain in this dreamlike existence for forever. Right, so we'll start with the analysis of the poem in 5 minutes. I'll be back in 2 minutes. So let us start with the analysis of Lotus Eater. Yeah. So there is theme of escapism. The dominant theme is the escape from the reality, the escape from the hardship and struggles of life. The lotus symbolizes forgetfulness and withdrawal from your day-to-day life experiences. The sailor reject responsibility, the struggle of life, and the effort that they had to made. The effort that they have to put in order to reach back to their house. So they are saying that what's the point of going back to the house? They might have the people who are close, the family and the friends, they might have assumed that we have already died. So why bother them by going back again? There's no point of, and why we are bothering ourselves also by all these undertaking all the struggle and the pain to go back to the place. So they desire a life of eternal rest and ease. They want a life full of eternal rest, complete rest and ease. This reflects the longing to escape the pressure of existence. So this is reflecting their longing, that how they want to escape the pressure of existence. Contrast with heroic idols, the poem is completely in contrast with the heroic idols. Like in the earlier poem we have seen, that we sees Ulysses, and he does not want to rest. He want to experience, he want to explore, he want to act. While on the other hand, these people are saying, no, we want rest. It's enough of the struggle. It's enough of the pain that we have undertaken. Now it's time for us to relax. Even the nature is getting chance to relax. So why are not human beings relaxing? Why are we not relaxing? So this is what he's saying, and he basically is representing another view of the heroic life, that even the heroes, they are getting tired. They also want rest. They also want comfort. It is not that the heroic vision has only one interpretation. It has other interpretation as well, and this is the another interpretation, that they are also human. They also want to rest. They also want a bit of comfort. The poem stands in contrast with Ulysses. Ulysses celebrates action, ambition, perseverance. The Lotus Eaters promotes rest, passivity, and withdrawal from life. Together, the poem represents two opposing responses to life: striving versus surrender. Victorian context, fatigue and doubt. The poem reflects Victorian anxieties. Industrialization created a sense of mechanical labor and exhaustion. Scientific developments led to loss of faith and uncertainty. The sailor desire to rest can be seen as a reaction to the spiritual and physical fatigue. So the decisions that the sailors are making in order to withdraw from all these struggles of life is also reflective of the uh, ideas of spiritual and physical fatigue. Then, philosophy of life and death. The sailors are questioning that why life involves constant struggle. Why is it so that human beings have to struggle continuously, even if the nature is getting a chance to relax? Then why are not human beings getting a chance to relax? Why is that human beings endure all kind of suffering? They suggest that death and rest are natural. Endless effort is meaningless because death and rest are natural. This is the final outcome that each human being will be having, no matter whether you are heroic or you are non-heroic. But this will be the end of your fate. So why are we struggling? What is the meaning of efforts? What is the reason for which we are putting endless efforts if we'll be dying one day? This introduces a philosophical pessimism. What is pessimism? Hopelessness. Because eventually we'll die. So what is the purpose of this cumbersome and burdensome life? Use of choric song. The choric song is crucial. Collective voice replaces individual identity, because the choric song is being performed by sailors collectively. Collective voices replacing individual identity creates a hypnotic persuasive effect, reinforces the shared desire for escape. It gives the poem a dramatic and almost musical structure. Imagery and style. Tennyson uses rich, sensuous imagery such as dreamlike landscape, slow streams, hazy skies, silent valleys. Soft sounds and repetitive rhythms create a lulling effect. The style mirrors the theme. What is the theme? The poem itself feels like a state of trance or sleep. So the style in which the poem has been written is actually reflective of a state of trance or sleep. Moral ambiguity. The poem does not clearly condemn or support the sailors. There is a sort of moral ambiguity because the poem is not directly condemning or supporting the sailors. There is a sort of moral ambiguity. Their desire for rest is understandable, but their rejection of duty may seem irresponsible. So they are desiring for rest. That is one thing. It is understandable. Every human being wants some rest and comfort. But if they are stating that they wants to uh, give away their responsibilities and duties, then it might sound a bit irresponsible. So this ambiguity invites multiple interpretation from the reader's perspective. Critical interpretation, sympathetic view. The poem expresses our genuine human need for rest and relief from sufferings. If we try to interpret it into a critical view, it warns against excessive escapism and loss of purpose. So it is also warning us against excessive escapism. We cannot escape the realities. If we do so, we might lose the purpose of our life. Conclusion, the Lotus Eaters presents a powerful meditation on weariness, escapism, and the human desire for peace. In contrast to the active heroism of Ulysses, Tennyson explores the temptations to withdraw from life's struggles, making the poem a profound reflection on the balance between effort and rest, duty and desire. The Lady of Shalott. This is another poem written by Alfred Lord Tennyson. So the poem is divided into 4 parts, and each part tells the story of a mysterious lady. So there is a mysterious lady. Who's that lady? The Lady of Shalott, and we are not aware about her name. So there is the mysterious lady who lives in a tower on the island of Shalott. And what is she doing? She is a mysterious lady. She lives alone in a tower on the island of Shalott near Camelot. She is under a curse. So, as I have told you earlier, she is living alone. She is abandoned. She is living in a lonely tower on the island of Shalott because she has been cursed. She cannot look directly at the outside world. So, she used to see the outside world using a mirror because she was not allowed to directly see the real world via her eyes. So she cannot directly look at the outside world and must instead view it through a mirror, weaving that she sees into a tapestry. Right? So through the mirror, she views a tapestry. Part 1, the poem opens with a vivid description of the landscape around Camelot. So what is the part 1 explaining to us? Part 1 is opening with a vivid and rich description of the landscape of the Camelot, the place on which the island was situated. It has fields, it has a flowing river, and the distant castle. So the castle was the same castle in which the lady was basically cursed and banished and isolated. The Lady of Shalott lives isolated in her tower, and although people hear her singing, no one has seen her. She remains a mysterious, almost mystical figure. Right? So people have heard her voice because she used to sing, but no one has ever seen her. So she remains mysterious. Right? So because she is not allowed to see the real world directly, she has to use a mirror. So that is one of the reasons that people have never seen her. They have only listened to her singing, and that is why she is a mysterious, almost mythical figure. Now part number 2, we learn about the lady's condition more clearly. Now we get to understand the condition of the lady more clearly, that why she is isolated, why she is living here, why she is mysterious. So she spends her time weaving a magic web, watching the world only through a mirror. So she spends her time weaving a web, and she is watching the world only through the mirror. She sees reflection of knights, lovers, and daily lives, but she remains detached, right? So she sees a lot of reflection in the mirror, such as of knights, of lovers, of the daily life of people, but she remains detached. Eventually, she grows tired of this indirect experience, saying, I am half sick of shadows. So she gets very much, what we can say, tired. She gets tired, she gets fatigued, she gets exhausted by seeing the people in a very indirect manner. There is no direct experience of life that she is having. She's saying, I'm half sick of the shadows. For her, the life of people, the humans, were only like a shadow, that too a half shadow, because it is indirectly seen. The turning point occurs when Sir Lancelot rides past the tower. What is happening? A turning point comes to the life of the Lady of the Shalott when one day Sir Lancelot rides past her tower. His appearance, bright, energetic, and full of life, captivates her. Unable to resist, she looks directly out of the window towards Camelot. This act breaks the curse. The mirror cracks and the web flies apart, signaling her impending doom. So, what is happening? Finally, she is not able to resist herself, and she directly sees outside the window, and the curse is broken. This act breaks the curse. The mirror is broken, and the web is also the web also flies away, signaling that her doom is impending. Now, part 4, accepting her fate, the lady leaves the tower, finds a boat, and writes her name on it. She floats down the river towards Camelot, singing her final song. By the time she reaches the city, she has died. The people of Camelot are struck by her beauty and mystery, and Sir Lancelot briefly remarks on her loveliness. So, what is happening? She finally accepts the doom fate. The lady leaves the tower. She boards a boat and writes her name on it so that people finally get to know who she was. She floated down the river towards Camelot, and she was singing her final goodbye song. By the time she reached Camelot, she had died. The people of Camelot are struck by her beauty and mystery, and even Lancelot briefly remarks at how lovely she was. The theme of isolation and alienation are prevalent. The lady is completely cut off from the real world. She experiences life only through reflection, that is, through mirror and shadows. Represent the loneliness of the artist or individual. It is representative of the loneliness of artist as well as an individual. Her isolation is highlighting the human need for direct experience and connection. The isolation that the Lady of Shalott was experiencing is highlighting that human needs direct experience and connection with their natural world. Art versus reality. A central conflict in the poem is between art, weaving of the web, and reality, living in the world. The lady's tapestry symbolizes artistic creation. It is beautiful but indirect. It lacks real experience. Her decision to look at the real world suggests that life must be lived, not merely represented. So finally, when she's gathering all her courage and looking outside the window directly, it shows that life must be lived and it should not be just represented. The curse symbolic meaning. The curse is never explained. Uh, it may represent social restrictions, especially on women, or the limitation placed on artists, or the dangers of crossing boundaries between art and life. Right. So the curse has never been explained in the poem. It might represent the crossing of boundaries. It might represent social restrictions that are put upon women. It might represent limitation placed upon artists, like we were discussing in Fra Lippo, that there were certain restrictions because of which he could not represent the realistic nature of art. The ambiguity adds depth to the poem. So the ambiguity of the symbolic nature of the curse is adding depth to the entire poem. Role of Sir Lancelot. Sir Lancelot symbolizes energy, vitality, and reality. The attraction of the outside world. So Lancelot is representing the attraction of the outside world. His presence triggers the lady's transformation, but he remains largely unaffected, emphasizing her tragic fate. So, because of him, there is such a drastic step that the lady has taken, but he remains unaffected by it, right? Because he has no knowledge about that the doomed fate of the women was because of him. It is because she chose to see him directly through the window, but he is completely unaware. So he is actually basically representative of the temptation, attraction of the outside world. His presence triggers a lady's transformation, but he remains largely unaffected, emphasizing her tragic fate. Theme of desire and transgression. The lady's act of looking directly at Camelot is an act of desire for life and experience rebellion against restrictions. However, this leads to her death, suggesting a tragic cost of pursuing dream or a critique of rigid societal constraints. Right? So she finally decided to live her life, not just as a representation, but as an experience. But she has to pay a cost for it, and that was her life. So it might be a tragic cost of pursuing freedom or a critique of rigid societal constraints that are put upon women. Imagery and symbolism. Tennyson uses rich symbolic imagery. The mirror is representing illusion, indirect experience. Web is also representing art and creativity. River, passage from life to death. Camelot, real active world. These symbols reinforce poem's central ideas. Musicality and style. The poem is highly lyrical, repetition. Camelot creates rhythmic and emphasis. Flowing lines mimic the movement of the river. Soft musical language enhances the dreamlike quality. Feminist interpretation. So the lady can be seen as a symbol of women restricted by the Victorian societal expectation. During the Victorian period, there was this idea of a angel, angel of the house, right? And that woman is someone who is very passive, who's agreeing to everything the male is stating. They are actually chastised, they are delivering all their household duties, they are adhering to the wishes of their partners, or basically the patriarchal figures. So these were the kind of women who are seen as the angel in the house during the Victorian period. So the lady can be seen as a symbol of women who are restricted by societal expectation, because there is a certain notion or a stereotype that society has created in relation to a ideal women. Denied direct participation in life, her tragedy reflects the consequences of such limitations. The Lady of Shalott explores the tension between art and life, isolation and experience, restriction and freedom. Through the lady's tragic journey, Alfred Lord Tennyson presents a powerful reflection on the human desire to move beyond illusion and truly engage with reality, even at great personal costs. So, this is what Tennyson is trying to present, that human desire to move beyond illusion and truly engage with reality, even at personal cost. So it that is the human desire, and you have to pay a cost for it. So the last text that is prescribed for you by Tennyson and in the entire course is that The Charge of the Light Brigade. It is a patriotic poem written by Tennyson. So the poem commemorates a real historical incident during the Charge of the Light Brigade during the Crimean War. So it is actually during the Battle of Balaclava that this particular poem was written. This poem is written in reference to that particular incident. It was published in the year 1879, I guess. But the incident is that of earlier times. So where a brigade, so what is happening? The poem is commemorating a real historical incident. So the poem is actually based on a real historical incident during the Crimean War, during the charge of the Light Brigade, where a brigade of British cavalry. So there was a group of British cavalry, the soldiers who were on the horseback, mistakenly charged into a heavily defended Russian position due to a miscommunication in order. So what is happening? There were some soldiers from the British army who were riding over the horses, cavalry. They were mistakenly charged. They were asked to charge into heavily armed Russian forces because of the miscommunication. So there has been miscommunication in orders, and because of that, the people who were having no arms and cannons, they were asked to charge upon the Russians who were completely jam-packed with cannons and artilleries. The poem opens with the famous line, half a league, describing the rapid advance of 600 soldiers into the Valley of Death. Right, so half a league, it shows a time period. It describes the rapid advance of 600 soldiers. They were around 653 soldiers who were walking into the valley of death. Valley of death is actually symbolic of their death, because they were having no arms, and they know that they are going into the valley of death. They are almost, it is something that is bound to happen, because they have no arms with them. So if they are walking into the valley, if they are walking into the place where the Russian army is there, they are definitely going to die. So it is symbolic of a valley of death. So despite knowing the danger, the soldiers obey orders without hesitation. Despite knowing the danger, despite knowing the consequences, that if they enter that place they are going to die, they obey the order without any hesitation. The speaker is acknowledging that someone had blundered, indicating that the command was flawed, yet the soldiers continue their charge. So the speaker is acknowledging that the command that was given was miscommunicated, as well it was a blunder from the end of the leader. But still, the soldier continue their charge because they were fighting for the reputation of their country. So even when they know that they are going to die, they even not even hesitated. They were not even scared. They just went into the valley of death. So as they move forward, they are surrounded by enemy artillery. So I have told you that they were on the horseback. They were having no artillery and cannons. But while on the other hand, the Russians were having proper artillery, cannons firing from the front and the both sides. So there were cannons and firings happening from every side. The imagery vividly depicts the chaos, violence, and bravery of the soldiers as they ride into almost certain death. So the image is actually depicting the violence and bravery on part of the soldiers, that they know that they are almost about to die, but still they are going into the danger. So in the later stanza, the poem describes the aftermath. Many soldiers are killed and only a few return. Only around 195 soldiers return out of 653 soldiers. So you can understand the kind of destruction, the kind of bloodshed that has happened, and all that happened just because of one miscommunication and blunder on the part of a senior colonel. So the poem concludes by urging readers to honor the courage and sacrifice of the 600 who charged so bravely despite the fatal mistake. So, so basically, many soldiers are killed and only a few return. The poem is concluding by urging readers to honor the courage. So the poem is asking the readers to honor the courage of those who have died, because they know that this is a blunder. This is a command which is miscommunicated. They know that it is going to end in a blunder, but still they went for that command because they wanted to honor the word of their leader, to honor the uh, nation, and that is why they sacrificed their life, knowing that they are going into the valley of death. So we should honor the courage and sacrifice of the 600 who charged so bravely despite the fatal mistake, despite not having any arms and artillery and cannons. So, if we talk about the theme of the poem, so there is the theme of heroism and duty. The central theme is heroic obedience. Soldiers follow orders without questioning. They are not even questioning that why you are asking us. We do not have any arms. Emphasis on duty, discipline, as well as loyalty. The line, there's not to reason why, there's but to do and die. There's not to reason why, there's but to do and die. So they are not asking that why do we have to do it. It is just that we have to do and die. It is just that we have to enter that place and die. It is just that we have to go and surrender ourselves because it has been commanded. Highlights unquestioning commitment towards the nation. Tennyson glorifies their bravery rather than criticizing their obedience. Tennyson is glorifying the bravery instead of talking about the obedience that they were doing, even when they know that the decision is blunderous. So, critique of authority. Although the poem celebrates heroism, it also hints at criticism. Someone had blundered, which suggests that there has been some human error. However, the poem avoids direct condemnation. This creates a tension between heroism and incompetence. Use of repetition and rhythm. The poem rhythm mimics the galloping of horses, repetition of cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them. There was firing from right, from left, because cannons were all around them, emphasizing the soldiers were being surrounded by cannons and artilleries, and also reflective that it is called as as the valley of death because it shows the inevitability of death. Imagery and symbolism. Tennyson uses rich symbolic imagery. Okay. We have opened a different. Yeah. Yes. So Tennyson uses powerful imagery, Valley of Death, which is having a biblical reference and symbolizes the doom of the soldiers. Then Jaws of Death, Mouth of Hell, they are all personification of the level of destruction the soldiers have to face because of the blunderous command given by the senior. These images heighten the sense of danger and sacrifice made by the soldiers. Structure and ballet form. It is written in the form of a ballet. Ballet is a narrative poem which depicts a story. So the poem resembles a ballet, simple rhythmic structure designed for oral recitation, enhances emotional and patriotic appeal towards the nation. Glorification of war versus the reality. So the poem represents war in two ways. First, it is glorified the soldiers who were going into the valley of death. They are considered to be heroic and courageous. So it glorified bravery, honor, sacrifice. It is also realistic because it's talk about chaos, death, error, and blunder. The duality reflects Victorian attitudes towards war. Then there is this idea of collective heroism. Unlike poems focus on individual heroes, this poem is celebrating a group, right? So it is not focused on just one hero or on just one individual person. It is actually celebrating the entire uh, group of around 653 soldiers who went to fight against the Russian army even without having any arms. So they were going knowingly into the valley of death, and they know that their death is inevitable at that particular point of time. Still, they are showing courage and they are showing strength, right? So they are being commemorated for it. The poem is celebrating the entire group of 653 people, which is emphasizing unity and the shared sacrifice made by the soldiers. The Charge of the Light Brigade is a powerful tribute to courage and duty in the face of certain deaths. While it glorifies the bravery of soldiers during the charge of the Light Brigade, it also subtly acknowledges the tragic consequences of human error because they are calling the decision of charging towards the Russian as blunderous because they were not prepared for charging. Through rhythmic intensity and vivid imagery, Alfred Lord Tennyson creates a poem that is both patriotic and deeply moving. Let us discuss some of the MCQs. Right, so that you can understand how much you have grasped through the entire lecture. So the first MCQ is, who is the speaker in Ulysses? Is it Telemachus? Is it Achilles? Is it Ulysses? Is it Hector? So obviously the eponymous character Ulysses is the major protagonist. What is Ulysses dissatisfied with? He is dissatisfied with his idle and monotonous life as a king. Who is interested with ruling Ithaca? Is it Penelope? Is it Telemachus? Is it Laertes or is it Mentor? It is Telemachus, the son of Ulysses. to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. It is reflecting despair, determination, anger, or fear. It is representative of the determination. Then we have MCQ on the lotus eaters. So in the poem, what happens after eating the lotus? So we have discussed about the lotus eaters by Tennyson, which is based on book number 9 of Homer's Odysseus. So what is happening when the sailors, they are consuming the lotus? People gain strength, people forget home and lose ambition, people become warriors, people become immortal. So what is happening to them? It is actually people forget home and they lose all ambition, because they start thinking that what is the point of life if at one point of time we all gonna die. So what is the point of all this struggle? The mariner feel energetic, restless, lethargic, and dreamy, and angry. They feel lethargic and dreamy because of the lotus fruit they have consumed. The lotus eater symbolizes war, laziness and escapism, courage or justice. It is symbolic of laziness and escapism. The poem is inspired by which epic? It is inspired by Iliad, Odyssey, Aeneid, or Paradise Lost. It is inspired by the Greek epic by Homer, the Odyssey. What do the sailors ultimately desire? Adventure, war, rest, or wealth? They eventually desire for rest and escape from the turmoil of life. So now, MCQ from Charge of the Light Brigade. The poem is based on which historical event? World War One, the Crimean War, Napoleonic Wars, American Civil War. It is actually modeled around the Crimean War. How many soldiers are referred to in the charge? Around 600 soldiers. There's not two reasons why suggest freedom, blind obedience to orders, fear, or confusion. It shows blind obedience to orders. So what is the tone of the poem? Is it humorous? Is it critical? Is it heroic and tragic, or is it romantic? The tone of the poem is heroic as well as tragic. So what literary device is used in? Canon to right of them, canon to left of them. Simile, personification, repetition, or irony. It is actually repetition, because canon to left of them, canon to right of them. It is a use of a literary device called repetition. So this was it from my end. We have completed the entire course on British Poetry Second, and we have completed the all 4 blocks, right? So there are a total of 4 blocks that we have completed. We have started with the poetry of, I guess there was the poetry of Dylan Thomas that we have done. Then we have done Auden. Then we have done Robert Browning. Then we moved to the poetry of Tennyson. So we have done a lot of poetries in this entire course. And I hope whatever the poetries that we have included in the course were fruitful for you, and you are able to understand the context in which these poetries were written, and you are also able to understand the style and the characteristic features with which the writers were writing the poetry, right? So I hope whatever we have discussed in these lecture has been fruitful for you, and it will help you in your exams, and you will basically it will be advantageous, or basically you will going to use whatever you have learned via these lectures in the final examinations as well. So I hope it is going to be fruitful for all of you. And even if you have not watched the live session, or you have not attended the live session, the recording option is always there for you. You can go back to the recordings, and if you encounter any issues, or if you encounter any queries that you want me to answer, you can mail me at my mailing ID. Right, so this is my mailing ID, and you can send me your queries related to any of the poem that we have discussed in the course, and I will try to basically help you in solving that query as soon as possible. This was it from my end, and with that we are going to wind up this particular course on British Poetry Second for the students who are currently in their masters. So I hope it was an enriching experience for you, and wishing you all the luck for your future and your examination. Hope whatever we have discussed will be fruitful for you in the future. Thank you so much. And I hope you must have developed some love for poetry after reading the poems that we have discussed in these lectures. Okay, so here is a final goodbye from my side, because this was the end of the course. This was the last session that was scheduled for you. And with that, I think from next week, you will be having a different semester. So, all the best for that, and all the best for your examinations.